Archaeology at Work is a series of films which looks at those detectives of the past, the archaeologists. Archaeologists try to find the clues left by people who lived before us, and they try to make sense of them. Each film explores one important part of the fascinating world of archaeology. In this film, we're going to look at a special kind of archaeology called field work. This is archaeology without excavation. Field work is often carried out before an excavation takes place. Wherever people have lived in the past, they've left behind evidence of their lives, both on the surface and under the ground. Fieldwork archaeologists look for this evidence in a number of different ways. Archaeologists work like detectives. They collect the evidence and then interpret the data they have gathered. Archaeology is all about making sense of the past by finding where people lived and worked, gathering the evidence they left behind, and telling the story of how they lived in that place. You can see things better from up in the air. You can see the shape of this roundabout more clearly from above than from down on the road. These great banks at Borough Hill in Leicestershire were built by people before the Roman period. From the air you get a better view as you can see the layout very clearly. This site at Ingersby in Leicestershire is difficult to understand from the ground. You can see humps and bumps under the grass, but are they natural or are they signs of human activity? It's easy to think they're just natural until you see them from the air. It's an entire village that was deserted 800 years ago in medieval times. The grass has grown over the remains of the houses and streets. Here is another deserted medieval village in North Yorkshire. We know a great deal about Warren Percy because it's been excavated by archaeologists who've made a plan of it. The Grand Union Canal was cut through some medieval field strips in the early 19th century. These strips are called ridge and furrow. They show up very clearly from the air. From the ground, they're less easy to understand, especially on a dull day. But when the sun is low, the ridges cast shadows and show up clearly. Shadows are very important in aerial photography. Earthworks cast shadows, but so do growing crops when the plants are growing at different heights. If plants are growing over a hidden ditch, they'll grow taller than the surrounding plants because they'll get more water and food. The taller plants will cast a shadow that can be seen from the air. The opposite happens when plants are growing over a buried wall. You can also see marks in the soil on ploughed fields. You can see darker soil ploughed out from hidden ditches and stones from buried walls. We're flying over Shropshire. Keep a lookout for a crop mark in this cornfield. Can you see it yet? It looks like a circle towards the middle of the field. It's a crop mark of a ditch dug around a prehistoric burial mound. It's been ploughed away, but the ditch still shows up. Here is another crop mark, this time of two buildings in Norfolk. On the left is a church with a semicircular end. On the right is the house of the lord of the manor in medieval times. This is the A5 road. It's built over a Roman road called Watling Street. It leads directly to the Roman city of Wroxeter in Shropshire. As the helicopter approaches Wroxeter, you can see the remains of the two great ditches which protected the Roman city. The marks curve round into the edge of the cornfield. Here in the centre of the city you can see that parts of the Roman buildings are still standing. The wall was part of the town baths. This is what the buildings look like. This was the centre of a great city, and only a tiny part of it is visible. The rest still lies under the surrounding fields. This is the baths area. You can see the rest of the city around it. These are streets. And these are houses. You can even see individual rooms. Discovering sites from the air is very important for archaeologists, but it is only one of the many techniques used in looking for the past. Old documents and maps contain a wealth of information about the past. This county record office in Worcester contains archives going back many hundreds of years. This map is a valuable record for an archaeologist. It shows how land was divided into fields in 1819. James compares the 170-year-old map with a modern map. It could provide a vital clue for his investigations. Another document, written in 1841, reveals information about the area under research. It shows who owned which parcels of land at the time and where each one was. By researching old documents and maps, archaeologists can learn a great deal about an area they plan to investigate before they go out to work in the field. This 19th century map contains a lot of information about part of Essex as it used to be over 100 years ago. You can see houses and barns, roads, tracks, field boundaries, woods and ponds. Surveyors have been recording the ownership of land over many centuries. This 17th century map shows details of individual buildings, such as the church at the top right. Old Thorndon Hall in Essex no longer exists. This detailed map from the 16th century was used as a guide by archaeologists who excavated the site. Field names are clues as to how land was used in the past. Kilns were discovered at Potter Row thanks to this map. The site of this windmill was another discovery. So a great deal of background archaeological research goes on in records offices and archives. If you look at an Ordnance Survey map, you will see it has a grid of squares all over it. This national grid, as it is called, helps you to locate an exact point on the ground. When archaeologists survey an area, they always find a fixed point on the map, such as this church, to work from. This electronic distance measuring instrument, known as an EDM, works out exactly where it is in relationship to the church. So the plan the archaeologists will make of these earthworks will fit in exactly with the national grid. The EDM sends out a laser beam that is reflected back by the mirror on top of the staff. The staff is moved the same distance every time along a tape laid on the ground. The EDM calculates how far away the staff is and at what angle it is. The data is then entered into a handheld computer. We will now see two different methods of surveying these earthworks. The first method will plot the position of the humps and bumps and the second will produce a plan of them in profile. The grid point will be taken from the wall at one end of the site. The first thing to do is to run out a baseline and to put in pegs at regular intervals. When they've finished, the whole site will be covered with a grid of pegs and lines set up by the team.
Yeah, that's fine. Do the next 10 metres then.
Next, another line is set out at right angles to the baseline. This instrument enables the survey team to be certain this second line is at right angles to the baseline.
Okay, Duncan, right 20 centimetres. Back, left 10. That's it there, fine.
Here, a baseline runs between the two rods. Two tapes, A and B, are pulled out from the ends of the baseline to form a triangle. The baseline is set on the grid they laid out earlier.
A 7.7, B 4.5.
The measurements of tapes A and B will enable them to plot the exact positions of the earthworks on their plan.
A 6.3, B 8.7.
The measurements are taken all over the earthworks and the results noted down.
A 11.9.
They work across the site until they have plotted the exact positions of the earthworks. Here is a drawing of the earthworks showing their positions against the grid. These marks show which way the earthworks slope. The second method of surveying these earthworks is to use the EDM to plot the heights and depths of the humps and bumps.
Okay.
A tape has been stretched across the tops of the earthworks to provide a baseline to work along.
Okay.
The staff is moved metre by metre along the tape and a reading taken at each position. From this information, the computer will be able to generate a drawing which shows the profile of the earthworks.
I'm at 5 metres now, Chris.
This drawing shows part of the shape of the earthworks. Field walking is another way of making discoveries about people in the past. Field walkers search for bits and pieces left behind after a field has been ploughed. Rachel is planning a field walking day. A suitable field has been selected and the farmer's permission obtained. A grid is laid out on the field. All the finds from each rectangle will be kept together.
This is the plan showing the field. We're all aligned.
This group of volunteer archaeologists are being briefed by Rachel before they set off to walk the field.
Up in that direction. And everyone will be spaced out 25-metre intervals from there.
You go.
They're each given a set of numbered bags, one for each rectangle they will search.
Face this. Nice. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Okay, go!
Each time a field is ploughed, bits that are hidden below the surface may be brought to the top. The field walkers pick up everything they think somebody has made or used in the past, like flint tools, bone, bits of building material and pieces of metal.
Okay. Stop. Change bags now.
At the end of each rectangle, they must change bags. This flint is recognised as a tool made thousands of years ago. At the end of the search, all the bags are handed in.
2 to 9. One was outside the area.
Field walkers report any areas they think may be of special interest.
There was a concentration of a building material.
Some sort of building there. Again, potentially you might find a concentration of Roman pottery in one corner, which would suggest the former presence of a Roman building in that area.
All the finds are taken back to the archaeologists' headquarters for analysis. Decisions have to be made about which finds can be safely washed. It's important to get the dirt off so they can be identified. The finds stay with their bags. Once they're dry, the number on the bag will go onto each of the finds. Finally, the finds are examined to see what they're made of, what they are, and when they were made. This flint was a tool for scraping animal skins to clean them. It was made and used by prehistoric hunters. It takes far longer to analyse the finds than it took to walk the field. Here is the plan of the field with the results of the field walking plotted on it. The shaded areas show where Roman pottery was found. There was a scatter of building materials at A and B, showing where Roman farm buildings used to be. Field walking shows archaeologists what has been brought from underground by the plough. Next, we'll see how archaeologists look below the ground. This field is going to be investigated by the science of geophysics. First, a baseline has to be set out and the field divided into a grid. This is a magnetometer. It can detect very small variations in the magnetic field of the ground. It's good at detecting old ditches and pits hidden under the present ground surface. It takes a reading every metre and stores the data in its memory. Each part of the field has lines laid out every metre for the operator to take readings along. After each section of the field is completed, the data is downloaded into a portable computer. The readings will be analysed on the main computer and a plan of the magnetic variations in the field produced. This is the field we've just seen surveyed with the magnetometer. The dark curve is a ditch hidden under the ground. The difference in magnetism between the soil in the ditch and the surrounding soil is clear to see. The ditch runs round to the top. The second scientific survey technique we're going to look at is called resistivity. A small electrical current is injected into the ground through these electrodes. This instrument detects that electrical current. A buried wall will not conduct the electrical current well. It will act as a resistor to the current and will be identified as an area of high resistance. On the other hand, a ditch hidden under the ground will conduct the electrical current well and so be identified as an area of low resistance. As this machine measures the variations in resistivity, it is good at detecting both buried walls and ditches.
249.
The readings are noted down so they can be transferred to the main computer later.
188.
37, 224, 230, 212, 207.
The readings will be converted by the computer into a drawing that shows the variations in resistance detected in the field.
233, 241, 249, 231, 238, 226, 232, 237.
The blue area is probably a large ditch. This survey showed archaeologists what they might find under the ground. When the site was excavated, they discovered the large ditch and many other archaeological remains. It was all hidden under a field. Now we're going to see a team of archaeologists investigate a complete landscape. They'll carry out fieldwork in each of these white strips. The strips are marked in orange on this map. First, James and Rachel must carry out background research on the whole survey area. This involves looking at maps and aerial photographs. They also check on what has been discovered in the area before. 1,785 sites are known to exist in the whole area already.
Okay, we've got the mop there at the castle, like that, and the bailey coming off on this side, which shows quite.
Their search through the aerial photographs of the area reveal a further 900 sites. They compare the aerial photograph with an old map of the same area.
The field boundary on the map.
James also searches through old documents at the County Record Office. This map shows the field boundaries as they were 160 years ago. This document search revealed a further 304 sites. So, before the survey teams went out into the field, they already knew about nearly 3,000 sites. Rachel and Martin have come across a low mound on the moors. They'll investigate it very quickly and then move on.
Well, it looks like we've got a robbed out barrow here. We've got some map detail over there, which looks like that point there. And over there, there's a bend in the track, which is probably this point here. So that puts us somewhere in the middle here. Right, so we can locate ourselves by pacing out from this map detail here. And I'll take a compass bearing onto Red House Farm, which is over there.
Okay.
So if you can hold these, I'll get the compass out. Right, that's 351 degrees to Red House Farm.
Okay.
And we need to estimate some measurements for it. I think about 15 metres diameter. Height 1.5.
Yep.
And depth of the robbing hole? About
1 metre.
1 metre.
Now they've completed their survey, Rachel and Martin will walk on across the moor looking for another archaeological site. Another team have come across a bank with a ditch behind it.
Right. What we've got is this cross dike here marked on the map. So what says Andy the
One will pace out the width of the ditch, whilst another paces out how far they are from a known point on the map. They've all been trained to pace out metres accurately and to estimate the sizes of banks and ditches by eye.
How far's that?
5.
How far's that then, Andy?
9 metres overall.
Good, yeah. How much is that?
Where you're standing, it's 5 metres.
9 metres, yep. How wide's the central bank?
The bank's about 1 metre wide,
Metre wide, yeah.
half a metre high.
Half a metre high, yeah.
Your side is 5 metres wide.
Yep. What do you think that is?
It's possibly a holloway behind the ditch.
What's the distance?
27 metres.
27 metres.
In a short time, they have surveyed the ditch and located it on the map. Rachel and Martin are now setting out ranging rods across a large area of moorland, so the whole team can do a rapid search across it. This baseline is set out using a compass and will be tied into the grid. The team walk across the landscape in line, looking for any signs of past human activity in the form of banks, ditches, trackways or mounds. The areas they are examining have not been systematically surveyed for archaeological remains. As well as adding to the numbers of known sites in these areas, the information collected will allow the team to estimate what exists elsewhere in the region. They've come across a low bank. The team gather so they can each help in the rapid survey of this bank.
Back here, earlier, we've got the cross dike up the top, which we've also seen. So somewhere in here...
They need to find out where it is on the map, mark it in, and discover how far it is from known points.
Pace it out and come back and tell what the distance is. But then we should have it all sorted out and we'll be...
Part of the area is ploughed, and so the team carry out field walking, as we saw earlier. Back at the archaeological headquarters, the data gathered is entered on computer. This is the record of the barrow they found on the moor. It takes months to analyse all the data they have collected. Here is just one of the areas they surveyed with all the archaeological sites James's team has discovered plotted on it. They discovered a total of 2,883 new sites by fieldwork. This project has more than doubled the number of known sites in the areas the team surveyed. The techniques we have looked at have all added an enormous amount to our understanding of the historic environment. We can discover new sites from the air. We can find evidence in old documents and maps. We can survey earthworks in a number of different ways. We can search the plough soil for the past. And we can use scientific instruments to look underground. Archaeologists can build up an impressive amount of knowledge about a landscape by using the techniques of fieldwork. If we want to know more about a place, if we want to know in detail how people lived and worked there, then we need to gather all the evidence they left behind, all the clues buried in the soil. And that can only be done by excavation.
This is the archaeological site at West Heslerton in North Yorkshire. Today is the excavation's open day, when visitors have come from all around to see what the archaeologists have found. Over 150 buildings of an Anglo-Saxon village were discovered. A whole community of people used to live and work here over 1,500 years ago. But how did the archaeologists discover all this? In this film, we're going to look at the ways in which archaeologists uncover the clues for the past. The whole point of the dig is to find the evidence of the Anglo-Saxon people who used to live here and make sense of it. A team of expert archaeologists has been assembled to carry out this work. We're going to see how they work, see what tools they use, how they record what they find, and finally how they make sense of it all. Archaeologists are like detectives looking for clues and evidence so they can retell the story of what they think happened here. When Dominic, the excavation director, and his assistants have finished piecing together the evidence they've discovered, they'll be able to tell us the story of the people who once lived here. When they've finished, the archaeologists will be able to tell what work they did, what crops they grew, what sort of food they ate, what kinds of clothes they wore, and even perhaps what the climate was like. At West Heslerton, ploughing the fields deeply was destroying a nationally important site. A rescue excavation had to be carried out to collect as much information as possible before the ploughing destroyed the evidence which was under the ground. Over the centuries, the village has become buried in soil. The archaeologists know that the top few inches of this field have already been disturbed by ploughing. Their first job is to remove the topsoil. They bring in machines to do this because there is a large area to uncover. The machine has to be supervised very carefully. The soil is skimmed off in thin layers. The machine has uncovered some bones in the topsoil, so Dominic, who is directing this excavation, comes over to take a look. The machine has now got close to the undisturbed layers of soil. In a town, such a layer might be several meters down. In the countryside, it may be very close to the surface. Dominic decides the machine should move to another area. They have only a few weeks to strip the soil off the whole site, so that the excavation can get underway. This is the site after the topsoil has been removed. Dominic has opened up a large area because this will give him and his team a better chance of making sense of the information they recover than if they just looked at a series of small areas. After the machines have cleared the site, the next layers of soil are removed by hand. The commonest tool on an excavation is the trowel. They are used for carefully revealing in more detail the archaeological layers. Scrapers are used for more delicate work. Spoons are ideal for removing the soil from small holes. Brushes are used to clean up with, so the area can be seen clearly, especially when it's drawn and photographed. Any village must have had buildings, but what are these holes? They're places where posts of a building once stood. Archaeologists call these post holes. In this aerial photograph, you can see two very large dark patches and a number of smaller ones that form patterns. So now you can see the shape of the buildings. These post holes have been excavated, but where is the corner of the building? There must be some more still to be found. Mark is going to try and find them. He trowels very carefully, looking for any change in soil colour that might be where another post stood. Changes in soil colour can be very difficult to see. Mark's found one. The tag shows where it is. Everything found on the excavation has its own number. Archaeologists look very carefully at the ground. They can see changes in soil colour that most people wouldn't see. Now Mark's found the dark patch of soil, he'll excavate it to find out how deep it is. As he begins to work, you can see dark soil coming out of the hole. Mark found this post hole because the soil in it is darker than the ground around it. There is nothing left of the original post that once stood here, just the dark soil. Mark's excavated half the post hole so he can see exactly what shape it was. He's finished with this one and has found the next post hole close by. Again, he's excavating half of it. After he's made records of it, he'll come back and excavate the other half. Now we can see the shape of the whole building. Now Mark needs to measure it, draw it, and make notes of the results. He measures the hole's width and depth, and then records this information in a handheld computer. On some sites, this information is written on cards or in notebooks. It's very important that Mark makes accurate records. Part of the record is to describe the colour of the soil very accurately. Mark matches the soil colour against a special colour chart used by archaeologists. Now he's making a detailed drawing of the post hole. Inga is going to make a plan of the ground surface that includes the post holes. She's using a grid. She's drawing on graph paper, so the squares of the grid match the squares on her paper. The grid helps her make the drawing by eye, but she still needs to take measurements. In this way, every tiny detail on the ground surface can be recorded. The post holes will also be photographed. Every photograph will record the number as well. The red and white rod will show how big it is. Joe's taking photographs as well. At the top of this tower is a camera pointing down at the ground. This takes a series of photographs that will show the post holes from above. One photograph is taken every time the tower is moved. It is always moved the same distance along a baseline. Once it's in position, the photograph is taken. The pictures taken by the camera on the tower are joined together to make a large, detailed photograph of an area of the site. Later on, we'll see how this photograph can be used. Jill is part of the survey team, which is recording the exact position of each post hole and other features that have been found.
The number is
They're using electronic surveying equipment. This helps them make their detailed plan of the whole site.
Next number, please.
So recording the features on an archaeological excavation involves the collection of a vast amount of information. Here, the data from one of the handheld computers is copied into one of the main computers. A huge database of information about the site is built up. It will be used to write the report of the excavation when the digging has finished. As well as the records of the buildings that used to be here, there are also lists of the thousands of finds that have been excavated. These finds are some of the little objects left by the Anglo-Saxons who used to live here. Pieces of bone and pottery, for example. All clues to the way people used to live 1,500 years ago. Every time they find something, they need to mark where it is found, put it in a bag, and give it a number. Simon is about to excavate his part of the site. We're going to see what happens to a find and what can be learnt from it. As Simon scrapes with his trowel, he's looking for two things: changes in soil colour and finds. A change in soil colour would tell him he'd found a feature. A little object would be a find. Now you can see he's working very carefully around what looks a bit like a stone. He needs to find out how big it is, whether he's just found the top of something large, or whether it's a small object. It must be a find, so now he'll record it. This means giving it a number. This number identifies the area of the site it's been found in, the layer or depth it was found at, and the find itself. 93815. Remember that number, as we'll follow this find and see what happens to it. The tag identifies the spot the find was removed from. Simon's bringing in his finds. All the finds from the site are brought here to be sorted out. The archaeologists have to decide how best to clean each find. Many can be washed, but the most fragile ones are carefully packed and sent to a laboratory. The one Simon excavated is going to be cleaned now. This find can have its soil washed off. The bowl has water in it, and the soil is washed off with a paintbrush. On some sites they use toothbrushes. Nicky must get all the soil off so the surface of the find can be seen clearly. This has to be done carefully so the object is not damaged. There it is, 93815. Next, the finds move on to be inspected by Christine, who is responsible for all the finds on this site. Her job is to identify them. As she examines a find, she records its details and what she thinks it is on a computer. Find number 93815 is a piece of bone. 93815 has come to Trevor, the expert on bones. He measures it using calipers and enters the measurements on the computer. We asked Trevor what he thought 93815 was.
This is typical of the thousands of pieces of food waste which we found from...
Trevor compares it with other pieces of bone and identifies it as a piece of backbone.
It's probably from a cow. It's almost certainly a piece of vertebra. I would think that it's been slaughtered very young, between the ages of about a year and 18 months. And one interesting thing about it is that it's, on one of its surfaces, it's been gnawed, probably by a dog, which you can tell from the little indentations which survive in this surface where the dog has been gnawing out the marrow.
So what have we learnt? The Anglo-Saxon people who lived in this village kept cows. They slaughtered them to eat the meat. Sometimes they killed them when quite young, perhaps to save on feed over winter. They would have milked them and made cheese. They also kept hunting dogs. What a lot of information you can get from a little find with some archaeological detective work. But what about the people who lived in this village? Their remains have also been found in a cemetery close to the village. Dominic and his team have worked out that most people died between the ages of 30 and 40, so people lived far shorter lives than we do now. Their bodies were buried fully clothed, and often objects were buried with them, such as these pots and this comb. They even buried one of their hunting dogs, nicknamed Norman by the diggers. All this information from the graveyard is added to the other data from the village. After the excavations have been completed, Dominic, Mark and Christine begin to piece together the evidence. They're going through all the clues that have been collected. Now a different sort of detective work begins. This comb was found in one of the graves. Christine is checking it against drawings of similar combs from other archaeological excavations. The computerized list of finds is very useful. Mark is going through all the plans, photographs and drawings, looking at the evidence for the Anglo-Saxon buildings. These are the post holes of the building we saw him excavate. He checks them against a drawing made at the same time. It takes longer to analyze the data than it took to dig the site. Remember the photographs taken from the tower? Dominic is now copying the photographs into the computer. You can see the post holes. He does this so the computer can turn the photograph into a drawing. Now we can see the village. Finally, Dominic writes the excavation report. This report is an account of everything that's been found during the excavation and what the archaeologists think it tells us about the people who once lived here. Now other archaeologists can refer to it when they're piecing together the evidence from their own excavations. The report contains drawings of the finds and plans and drawings of the features. Now the site is a field again. All the topsoil has been put back and it's been ploughed. It looks like any other field, but the archaeologists know all the secrets it held. This drawing shows what Dominic and his team think the village of West Heslerton looked like in Anglo-Saxon times, from about 450 AD to about 850 AD. About 100 people used to live here. 150 buildings were excavated, houses, barns and workshops. The village was neatly laid out, as you can see, on each side of a stream. Each house was well built of wood, a strong timber frame, wooden walls and a thatch roof. The villagers made most things themselves, pottery to cook with and store food in, and tools and weapons of iron. But the main village industry was making cloth and clothes. Many tools for spinning and weaving were found, even the seeds from special plants for dyeing the cloth. All the food the villagers needed was produced in and around the village. In the fields were crops of wheat, barley and rye. We know that the climate must have been warmer and drier than it is today in North Yorkshire. The archaeologists found grape seeds, so they probably made wine here. There were flocks of sheep and herds of cattle. We know that they ate meat from cattle, sheep, goats and pigs. They even ate horses, deer, dogs, wild ducks and fish. And they even trained kites to catch food. Or perhaps it was for sport? But they kept some dogs as pets, or for hunting. Remember Norman, the hunting dog. But what were the people of this Anglo-Saxon village like? Careful detective work has provided all the clues needed to draw this picture. All the objects or fragments of them which this couple are wearing and carrying were found during excavation. So now the secrets of the fields have been revealed. You can see that archaeology really is all about finding people. But people also live in towns and cities. So now we're going to see what happens on a rescue excavation in a city. This is Worcester. People have been living here for over 2,000 years, since before the Romans. A large area called Deansway in the centre of the city is being redeveloped, so a new shopping centre can be built. Archaeologists working in towns usually can't dig very large areas, but they can take opportunities where redevelopment is taking place. In this way, the history of the people who used to live here is built up over many years. Evidence from the past hidden in the soil is often buried deep down in a city. This Roman ground surface is 3 meters below the present-day level of the city streets. Above the Roman level are layers of soil containing evidence from each later period of occupation. This series of layers can be very complicated to understand because later generations have disturbed the earlier layers as part of their use of the site. They've dug small holes for wooden posts and have dug larger holes for rubbish and lavatory pits. Later generations have made foundation trenches for stone or brick walls and excavated large volumes of soil to create cellars. The archaeologists remove the most modern evidence first. Eventually all the evidence for the site's history will be excavated. So although the Deansway site looks quite different to West Heslington, all the same activities are going on. Each surface needs to be trowelled in the search for features and finds. Careful measurements need to be taken and accurate drawings made. This is the remains of a bronze foundry from medieval times. The tiles formed part of a kiln used for melting bronze. As with all features, it must be recorded accurately. Each feature is photographed at different stages of excavation. The various levels and features are surveyed so as to establish their exact positions on the site. All the finds are brought here, where they are first cleaned. Then they're sorted into categories. Each find is marked with a number that shows exactly where on the site it came from. Many thousands of finds were recovered. In Worcester, the archaeological team have taken advantage of their city centre site to show the public what they've found. Hourly site tours are given by project staff and volunteers. Over the 11 months the dig was in progress, the site was visited by 32,345 people from 27 different countries. 84 school parties used the site as an educational resource. Almost every day, journalists from newspapers, radio and television covered the new discoveries at the site. The team of archaeologists has more work to carry out after the dig has finished and redevelopment has started. This is when all the information gathered is examined in great detail so as to build up a clear picture of how people lived and worked on the site in different periods of history. Work on identifying finds, such as this roof tile, continues. These boxes contain some of the thousands of finds gathered during the excavation. Victoria is identifying this collection of pottery finds. She breaks a small piece off so she can examine its structure under a microscope. Later, she compares a piece with diagrams of known types of pottery. She also weighs the samples. These crucibles were found at the site of the medieval bronze foundry. Hal is looking at the records of the bronze foundry we saw being recorded earlier. He's checking through the records in the process of putting together the final report. Computers play an increasingly important role in analysing the data. Here, the plans of the site are being studied on screen. The excavation revealed a great deal that was not previously known about the history of Worcester. During the Roman period, a number of tracks crossed the area in a regular pattern, with a scatter of houses, barns and animal sheds. There were also workshops where a number of crafts were carried out. During the Anglo-Saxon period, craftsmen and traders lived and worked in these houses, which had large yard areas used as farm yards and for crafts and industries. The people kept animals as well and had orchards with apples, pears and plums. During the medieval period, most of the buildings were timber framed with stone foundations. All sorts of industrial activities were happening in the areas behind the houses. At various times there was a smithy and a bakery, but the most important discovery was the bronze foundry. There was a massive furnace for melting bronze, with workshops and great pits for casting bells. The bronzesmiths also cast cauldrons and other kitchen vessels, together with objects such as buckles and candlesticks. So all the patient archaeological detective work has revealed a wealth of new information about Worcester's past. This is what the site looks like 3 years after the excavations ended. A new shopping centre is almost finished. If the archaeologists hadn't rescued the information from the past buried in the soil, a great deal of vital information about Worcester's past would have been lost forever. The developers have commemorated the bronze foundry by building this bell tower close to the site of the original foundry. Here in the basement of the shopping centre, we are on the site of that bronze foundry where cauldrons and kitchen vessels were made. Perhaps in thousands of years' time, one of these saucepans will turn up in an archaeological excavation and be put in a museum, for our present will one day be the distant past too.
The ridges cast shadows and show up clearly. Shadows are very important in aerial photography. Earthworks cast shadows, but so do growing crops when the plants are growing at different heights. If plants are growing over a hidden ditch, they'll grow taller than the surrounding plants because they'll get more water and food. The taller plants will cast a shadow that can be seen from the air. The opposite happens when plants are growing over a buried wall. You can also see marks in the soil on ploughed fields. You can see darker soil ploughed out from hidden ditches and stones from buried walls. We're flying over Shropshire. Keep a lookout for a crop mark in this cornfield. Can you see it yet? It looks like a circle towards the middle of the field. It's a crop mark of a ditch dug around a prehistoric burial mound. It's been ploughed away, but the ditch still shows up. Here is another crop mark, this time of 2 buildings in Norfolk. On the left is a church with a semicircular end. On the right is the house of the lord of the manor in medieval times. This is the A5 road. It's built over a Roman road called Watling Street. It leads directly to the Roman city of Wroxeter in Shropshire. As the helicopter approaches Wroxeter, you can see the remains of the two great ditches which protected the Roman. Another document, written in 1841, reveals information about the area under research. It shows who owned which parcels of land at the time and where each one was. By researching old documents and maps, archaeologists can learn a great deal about an area they plan to investigate before they go out to work in the field. This 19th century map contains a lot of information about part of Essex as it used to be over 100 years ago. You can see houses and barns, roads, tracks, field boundaries, woods and ponds. Surveyors have been recording the ownership of land over many centuries. This 17th century map shows details of individual buildings, such as the church at the top right. Old Thorndon Hall in Essex no longer exists. This detailed map from the 16th century was used as a guide by archaeologists who excavated the site. Field names are clues as to how land was used in the past. Kilns were discovered at Potter Row thanks to this map. City. The marks curve round into the edge of the cornfield. Here in the centre of the city you can see that parts of the Roman buildings are still standing. The wall was part of the town baths. This is what the buildings look like. This was the centre of a great city, and only a tiny part of it is visible. The rest still lies under the surrounding fields. This is the baths area. You can see the rest of the city around it. These are streets. And these are houses. You can even see individual rooms. Discovering sites from the air is very important for archaeologists, but it is only one of the many techniques used in looking for the past. Old documents and maps contain a wealth of information about the past. This county record office in Worcester contains archives going back many hundreds of years. This map is a valuable record for an archaeologist. It shows how land was divided into fields in 1819. James compares the 170-year-old map with a modern map. It could provide a vital clue for his investigations. Gathering the evidence they left behind and telling the story of how they lived in that place. You can see things better from up in the air. You can see the shape of this roundabout more clearly from above than from down on the road. These great banks at Borough Hill in Leicestershire were built by people before the Roman period. From the air you get a better view as you can see the layout very clearly. This site at Ingersby in Leicestershire is difficult to understand from the ground. You can see humps and bumps under the grass, but are they natural or are they signs of human activity? It's easy to think they're just natural until you see them from the air. It's an entire village that was deserted 800 years ago in medieval times. The grass has grown over the remains of the houses and streets. Here is another deserted medieval village in North Yorkshire. We know a great deal about Warren Percy because it's been excavated by archaeologists who've made a plan of it. The Grand Union Canal was cut through some medieval field strips in the early 19th century. These strips are called ridge and furrow. They show up very clearly from the air. From the ground, they're less easy to understand, especially on a dull day. But when the sun is low, Archaeology at Work is a series of films which looks at those detectives of the past, the archaeologists. Archaeologists try to find the clues left by people who lived before us, and they try to make sense of them. Each film explores one important part of the fascinating world of archaeology. In this film, we're going to look at a special kind of archaeology called fieldwork. This is archaeology without excavation. Fieldwork is often carried out before an excavation takes place. Wherever people have lived in the past, they've left behind evidence of their lives, both on the surface and under the ground. Fieldwork archaeologists look for this evidence in a number of different ways. Archaeologists work like detectives. They collect the evidence and then interpret the data they have gathered. Archaeology is all about making sense of the past by finding where people lived and worked